Oh my God, yes. Oh, it's gorgeous. This was Aunt Vi's. I completely, oh, wow. It's absolutely incredible. I mean, I cannot believe you did this.
This video is brought to you by Squarespace. From websites and online stores to marketing tools and analytics, Squarespace is the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence and run your business. I once heard said of a very particularly fine watch that we don't own them, we merely care for them for the next generation. But when does an heirloom, passed down through the ages, become a weight of its own? When does the burden of care trump the pleasure of ownership? For some, the heirloom is merely a relic of the past and holds no importance. For others, it's a connection to that past, a way of keeping those whose memories are encapsulated within alive. But regardless of the time one takes to deliberate this most esoteric question, time does not wait for the object itself. For this piece, a stunning desktop curio containing the wedding photograph of the relative who owns this piece, time has indeed not waited. Aside from being absolutely filthy with grime, dust, and dirt, the piece has begun to deteriorate, and the paint has flaked off in many locations, but most of all on the rightmost door, where almost the entirety of the pattern has been lost and threatens to continue to fall apart if no intervention is taken. The piece shows the traditional signs of wear and tear, scuffs, scrapes, dings and dents, abrasions on the front and back, the scars of a lived life of an heirloom. And some of the materials have begun to deteriorate beyond the point of repair. But such is the case when pieces are made not to last the test of time. And now the question before us is not just a technical one of repair. We must ask, whither the heirloom? For a piece like this, the contents are the prize, what truly matters. But that doesn't mean that the vessel can't also shine. And that concept has broad application, because with Squarespace, the website can get a little glow up too. It all starts with thousands upon thousands of beautifully designed, mobile-friendly templates that work anywhere, from desktop to tablet to phone. And if you can't find one that suits your tastes, you can hire a professional through Squarespace to help you design a custom fit. But it's not just aesthetics with Squarespace, it's the visitor experience as well. From easy to integrate contact forms, online scheduling of appointments, and a comprehensive e-commerce solution that's seamless, your visitors will have the smoothest possible experience. And with Squarespace, there's an entire platform and community built around helping you. So head over to squarespace.com for a free trial, and when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/Baumgartner to save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Now, because this piece is so delicate, before I can begin disassembling it and thinking about how I'm going to repair it, I need to take some intervention action right away. I need to stabilize all of that flaking paint so none of it is lost. And that's done with a very thin liquid adhesive. Using a syringe, which has much more control than a standard brush, I'll place and inject this adhesive on, around, under all of the flaking paint. This adhesive has a high capillary action, and you can see that it gets drawn into and underneath all of the flaking paint, something that isn't possible with a thicker adhesive or one that doesn't have this same action. The process is slow going, but by being methodical, I can ensure that all of the voids are filled with this adhesive. I'm not terribly concerned about any overflow on the surface. One, I can remove it before it dries, and two, the piece is still very dirty, so all of this adhesive is bonding to that top layer of dirt and not the actual paint layer. From this angle, we can see just how much all of this paint is lifting up and how fragile it really is. Even using this syringe with extreme caution can result in little chips flaking off or moving. Those will be reoriented eventually. But for now, I have to work methodically through all of these little flaking areas, making sure that none are lost. Because really, we barely have anything as it exists now. To lose any more would just put me at a further disadvantage when it comes time to repair and retouch this piece. And though it may seem to make sense to flood the entire area, that's not what I want to do. Even though it looks like a mess, I'm going to clean up as much of the excess adhesive as I can, and then I'm going to press it. First, I'll lay down a piece of silicone release film so that nothing sticks to that adhesive, then a piece of felt to compensate for the textural differences, and then I'll put a whole bunch of little bean bags full of shot on the surface of the piece. And these will compensate for the ridges and the textural variations that are on the piece. Using a standard hard weight wouldn't achieve this, and these little bags certainly do. And though they may seem small, they're filled with steel shot, and so they do have a significant amount of weight to them. And then once everything is aligned and ready, I'll wait. And then the next day I can come back and start removing all of these little beanbags, and hope that everything went according to plan. And while it looks messy, clearly all of that lifting paint has now been bonded down back to the surface of the piece. Exactly what I want. And now I'm ready to start taking this piece apart. Oftentimes when working with these little heirlooms, it's really difficult to figure out how they were made. And so I have to move iteratively, piece by piece. And the first surprise I find is that there's a little piece of old cardboard, something from a children's toy box. This is really cool, and I'm going to save this because it's part of the history of the piece. Now, it is full of acid, and it's not a great piece of material to use, but we can compensate for that. Because simply throwing this away and replacing it, well, yes, that may be the best archival solution, but it's not the best solution for the heirloom. This indeed tells part of the story of this piece. It gives us another connection to the past, and I'd like to save that if possible. Once removed, I can then lift out the photograph ever so carefully. This will be placed in storage until we're ready to return it with the piece. We're not going to do any work on this. The old glass will come out too because it needs to for this process, and we'll likely end up cleaning it or replacing it later on. We'll have to examine it and see about its fidelity. And then I can start trying to figure out how this thing is put together. It's so tiny and I don't see any visible hardware, so it takes me a minute to notice that indeed there are tiny, tiny little nails holding this thing together. Believe it or not, just this little nail is holding the entire top piece to the bottom piece, and that's what keeps the doors in place and the glass in place. It's a lot to ask of a little Brad. One on each side, and then hopefully the whole piece will come apart. And being extra careful, I'm able to slide the base off of the rest of the piece, and you can see it just simply comes apart. The doors separate from the top and bottom, and we now have it mostly taken apart. The first thing that I'm going to do now is start to clean this piece because it's absolutely filthy. Now, I made some tests earlier on, and I've determined which neutral organic soap of my stock I can use to clean this piece. And you can see, with a very light pass, a lot of grime is coming up. This is great. This is what we wanted. The client had expressed concern about it being so dark and passed along that their grandparents remembered this as a much brighter, livelier piece. And so that's what we're hoping to get back to. Now, it appears that this piece is made of wood and has been gilded. It appears maybe that it was with Dutch leaf, which is a pounded brass instead of gold, which is not uncommon. It's much more cost-effective, and it gives a similar look to gold. But it has either tarnished or it has just gotten incredibly filthy. So as I go along and work on the edges first to reveal some of that gilding, we'll get a taste of what this piece might have looked like at some point way back when. Well, that was quite a change. And the entire piece cleaned up really wonderfully, revealing all of that gilding and all of those beautiful colors on the floral motif. But there's still structural work to be done. I mentioned I separated the bottom. Well, I'm now separating the top, partially because I want to clean it. See, grime's still there. And I need to repair it, make sure that it has the fidelity to last another 100+ years. Now, these little screws are going to be replaced with slightly larger ones because the original holes were reamed out from movement, and so the smaller screws barely fit and have any purchase. These larger screws will compensate for the larger holes and hold the piece tight, hopefully forever. Again, it's surprising that 2 screws are all it takes. Now, one of the doors is broken, and I'm going to fix that by flexing the joint open and then painting in some adhesive. Hopefully, I've gotten enough in there, and with clamping and a little bit of glue squeeze out, we'll ensure that this is going to be a solid joint. Now, with the piece cleaned, we can see just how much damage there really is. I mentioned that pretty much all of the floral motif had flaked off, and so we need to repair that. And that's a retouching question. But before we can do the retouching, we have to do the fill-in, because there's a textural difference. If I were to just retouch where the losses are, well, we'd see all of those little cavities, the ridges and the bumps and the divots, and that wouldn't necessarily look good. Maybe head-on it would be fine, but the raking light would be a problem. So after filling it in and letting the fill-in dry, I'm now taking a very fine sanding sponge. This is about 320 grit. I'm going over the surface, and I'll stop when I reach the paint layer, and I'll switch to a swab with water. And then you can see all of the retouching I have ahead of me. But before I do that retouching, because there is so much fill-in, and because this fill-in will absorb the paint, and then it'll become matte, and then when I apply the final varnish, we'll have different sheens. I'm going to apply effectively a sealing coat. And this is a reversible synthetic resin that's going to go on the whole piece. And it's going to make sure that wherever I put retouching, there's a solid base. And so that retouching doesn't get dried out and then change sheens once I final varnish it. Now, on to retouching. Having the original piece is of critical importance here. because I have something to look at, a frame of reference, and that is what I'm going to do. I'm going to copy the left side. After a ton of retouching, more than I thought, but it was actually kind of fun. I have still more retouching to do, and this is with some of that gold. I'm going to be using mica powder, which is a mineral powder that, well, kind of looks like gold, mixed in with some retouching paint and some synthetic archival resin, and I'm going to use this just to touch up these little losses. At first, it doesn't really appear to match, and one of the problems with retouching with mica is that in some situations, in some lights and angles, it matches perfectly, and in others, it doesn't. But because we're not regilding this whole thing, this is the solution that we have available. Now, if the client does decide later on that they do want us to regild it, we can remove this mica because we're using a reversible resin as the binder. But for now, this should suffice. We're really just trying to knock down and minimize the appearance of the damage. Because this is an heirloom, a little bit of wear and tear, a little bit of life is okay. And before I assemble the whole piece, I'm going to apply a layer of varnish. And this may seem odd for something that's going to be handled, but I want to protect all of this gilding. Even though it's brass and not real gold, I don't want it to tarnish. And I also want to make sure that if this piece gets dirty again or handled, the varnish takes the beating and not the original piece. That's one of the great things about using a varnish. And because this is archival and UV stable and fully reversible, it will protect this piece going forward, whether it's handled or just as a display object. But most importantly, it's going to make it look exquisite. This gold is really going to glitter, and these colors are going to look rich and dense and really beautiful. And that is the primary reason why I'm varnishing it. And so now the time has come to reassemble this piece and figure out how to put it all back together. I took it apart, so it should be relatively simple, and frankly, it is. It's only 4 pieces and 2 brads that hold this entire construction together. And it begins by putting the doors onto the piece and into their little hinges. And then I can put the top on. And this is actually pretty clever. The top holds the top of the doors in place, and it slides onto some mortises, and that's really it. Now, getting everything aligned and making sure that there's free movement and that everything works how I want before I put it together finally is pretty important. I don't want to do anything that I can't undo later on. Now, I mentioned that there were just 2 brads holding this entire thing together. Well, for the ease of repairability, and because those brads were, like I said, very, very small, I'm using 2 brass screws. Again, those brad holes got enlarged over time, so I would have to use larger nails. But the nails are just hinge points. They're not going to hold the wood together like the threaded screw will. And I think this is going to be a stronger solution going forward, and if ever it needs to be repaired, it's clear how to disassemble it. Now, one of the things I mentioned early on was that some of the materials had deteriorated beyond the point of repair, and that silk backing, which is just a tablecloth, is one of those. So I sourced a new silk tablecloth with a similar pattern, but it's too bright. It's stark white, and that's not going to cut it. So I'm going to dye it. And I'll start with a big bowl of water and some dyes, and I'll just test the dye on a piece of blotter paper. And once I've achieved a color that I think is going to be appropriate, well, then I can move on to the silk. I have never dyed silk, so I have no idea what I'm doing, but I have some friends who do a lot of textile work, and they have given me some pointers, and well, if I mess up, I learn a lesson, and I move on and get better the next time. So, into the soup you go. Now the silk will sit in here for many hours, and then when I'm done with it and I think that I've achieved a good color, I'll remove it and wring it out and then let it dry. Now at first, I'm not terribly convinced that this was the right idea because it doesn't look all that different. But next to the original, you can clearly see the tone that the silk has absorbed. I'm going to mount this silk onto a piece of acid-free archival mat board using some film adhesive that I normally use with linings. I don't want to use a liquid glue because it will penetrate through the silk and show on the front. Then I'll trim and cut and fold and iron and make sure that it's all tucked away nicely so that the back looks just as good as the front. I mentioned that we were going to clean the glass. Well, we decided to replace it with a piece of museum glass. This has an ultraviolet filter on it which will protect the photo, and it's anti-reflective, or at least more anti-reflective than regular glass. I'm putting in a piece of acid-free board to separate the photograph from this piece of toy box, and then I'm going to put the backing on. This is going to protect the photograph both from the front and the back. A couple of very, very small brass nails throughout the backing board will hold it to the back of the frame construction. And by a few, I mean a lot. I may have gone a little overboard with the brads, but they look really good, so why not? Hey, Brad.
Hi, how are you?
I'm well. Nice to see you.
Good to see you too. What's going on here?
Well, I got a surprise for you.
Okay.
Let me get this mic on you first.
Okay.
You like surprises, right?
I do. I don't
You've
know.
done this before.
What do I
Down
do?
the shirt.
Okay,
I'm
okay.
going to plug this thing in.
Okay, okay.
You thought you were just coming here for
I did.
normal stuff, huh?
Yeah.
So you've had things here for a while.
Oh, yes.
For like, actually since probably before I moved here.
Yeah.
Right? Like I think I brought things from the old studio to here because you've been doing a house renovation for ages.
Ages.
So
yes.
you've been using me as free storage.
I didn't want to say that, but yes. Uh-huh.
And I've been slowly working through a lot of the pieces. But we've reached kind of the end of all the pieces that you brought.
Okay.
All the big ones, all the ones that you didn't have space for. But there was one that we kind of never talked about that you brought in, I think one time when you were bringing a whole bunch of stuff in. And you brought it in, you dropped it off, and I looked at it and said, yeah, I'll get to it. And then I said, yeah, I'll get to it next week. I'll get to it next week. And you said, yeah, we'll get to it next week. And we kind of both just forgot about it, I guess.
Okay.
Do you have any idea what I'm talking about?
I have no idea what you're talking about. Which is strange that I don't, but I have no idea what you're talking about.
So you brought me I guess it was a tabletop curio, kind of like a cabinet of some sort.
Okay.
And it was flaking terribly. It was filthy, it was kind of rickety. It was
Okay.
about, yay size.
Okay.
And had two little doors on it, and inside of it was a wedding photograph.
Okay.
And I think you brought it and you said, you got to do something with this. It's falling apart. I don't know what. And then, we both dropped the ball on it.
Which is surprising with you.
Yeah,
I can't imagine. Yeah.
You're too kind. So, here it is.
Oh my God, yes. Oh, it's gorgeous. This was Aunt Vi's. I completely, oh, wow.
Who's Aunt Vi?
Aunt Vi was my great aunt who passed away at age 105 and was the most wonderful person. I mean, she...
And she's who's inside.
Yes.
You wanna see?
I mean, yes, of course I do. I completely forgot you had this. Oh my God, that's unbelievable. That's Aunt Vi on her wedding day. That is incredible. What did you do? It didn't look anything like this.
Yeah, I forgot about it for a couple of years, and then when I looked at it, it just magically was like this.
Oh my God, it wasn't magically like this. It was it was in very bad shape.
Yeah, it was really, really bad. I mean, if you remember, first of all, the whole thing was
Oh
just
my God.
absolutely filthy.
Yes.
And this whole panel was missing. All of the decorations here were just gone. It had flaked off, and none of this was present. It was nicked and chipped and damaged, you know, just kind of like having been tossed around for ages. When did she get married?
Oh, probably around 19, I'd say probably 16 or something around there.
All right, so 100 plus years of having this thing. I'm surprised it actually survived that long.
Yeah.
You know, because not as a painting, when they sit on the wall, they can sit for 100 years and nobody does anything to them. But this gets handled, it gets moved around, and so I'm surprised it actually didn't get more damage. It was filthy. The right side was all missing. The glass was filthy, and the back all torn.
Oh,
rotted.
I remember. I didn't know what to even do with it. That's why I dropped it by to you. But
Yeah, well, I didn't know what to do with it either. That's why it sat for so long, because I kept looking at it and thinking, I don't know what I'm going to do with this. And then finally, as we were wrapping up all of the other pieces, kind of taking stock of making sure we didn't forget anything, I realized that I forgot this, and I said, shoot, I get to do this, because Brad's going to be pretty upset if I don't.
I'm absolutely shocked. I mean, I cannot believe it's unbelievable how gorgeous it is.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. When I first did the cleaning tests, I was really shocked.
Have you done anything like this before?
No, I mean, I think this is the first wedding, I don't even know what you would call this.
Curio.
Yeah, a little curio wedding photograph that I've ever done.
Even the photograph is in great shape.
Yeah, well, the photograph is in great shape, and we took out all the acid material and replaced it with acid-free material, and then we replaced the glass with ultraviolet UV glass, which is low reflectivity. So now the photograph is protected, and you don't get the glare that you had last time, so you can see it a little bit better.
It's absolutely incredible. I mean, I cannot believe you did this. I'm absolutely shocked. How long did this take you to do this?
When did you drop it off?
Oh, I don't even know. And I mean, I have a record too of things that I do drop off, but I think I just set this aside mentally.
Yeah.
You know?
I think we both set it aside mentally, because it was really kind of a hot mess when it came in.
Yeah.
So we cleaned it and then did some structural repairs to it, because it was kind of wobbly and rickety. And then, of course, obviously filled in all the losses and did the retouching
it's absolutely identical.
Yeah.
So this is original on the left here, and you did, and you copied that?
Yeah.
How do you do that?
Well, I mean, we was really lucky that we had the original here.
Yeah.
Because then I could just, when I was retouching, I literally just copied from this side to this side. Had we not had the original, it would have been much more difficult.
Wow.
But we got lucky on this one.
We got really lucky on this. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Thank you so much.
You're very welcome.
You are unbelievably talented. And this is probably a Nuka Macklin piece, I'm assuming.
Right, which
Maybe
was,
not.
Your family was Nuka Macklin?
Nuka Macklin, yes, exactly.
And Nuka Macklin was a major frame maker in the Midwest. They kind of...
Correct, and New York City,
in
too.
New York City, okay, right.
Yeah, and they made all sorts of decorative frames. And this is unreal that you were able to do
Well, this may be a one of a kind then, right? If you think about it, if Aunt Vi got married and Nuka Macklin was running and she had her wedding photo, maybe somebody at Nuka Macklin said, let's do something special for her.
Yeah, her father.
Yeah, so her father probably had the artisans make this, and this is probably a one of one.
Yeah.
Never made before, and a completely unique piece.
Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Thank you so much. It's incredible.
It's my pleasure.
Wow.